The birth of a new field. We're in a very special place, as Wendy mentioned, which has been the birth, has seen the birth of a lot of thinking back through the ages. So, it's a time to celebrate, but it's a time to celebrate and it's a time to look forward. But I'm going to start now from this vantage point, looking back, answering some of the questions that people ask me in the hallway. One of them is, okay, so what made you do it in the first place? In fact, it's a good question, but in fact, it was going back almost exactly 20 years. I wrote the first memo about the web, and what really led to it was frustration. I was working at a wonderful place, CERN, the European Particle Physics Lab in Geneva. People there come from all over. They were almost all physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, but engineers. They come from all over the world to make these huge machines. And they put together different pieces, and hopefully when they put them together, they'll fit together and they'll do high energy physics. But to make them all fit together, they have to understand each other's pieces. And of course they come with different computer systems. They all come from different universities. They bring different documentation systems, different word processors. And so back 20 years ago, in 1989, my frustration as a software engineer was that it was difficult, very difficult, to be able to find all the information I needed to do my job. I had to log on to one computer here and learn one programming language. I had to learn here, I had to log on to a different computer and learn a documentation system. And here I had to log on to a different computer, maybe using a different network, and learn how to get in touch with the library system. And when I got into some information, maybe I could get it back, but often if I got it back, it was in a format that I couldn't use it, couldn't directly use it on my computer. So it was an obvious frustration. If you're a software engineer, then you know that these frustrations are a challenge to your imagination. If you can imagine things being better, then you ought to go and write the program. So the idea was that life could be better. There could be one imaginary information system which one made to include all these others, to include them with references between them, with links that you could click on. It's a really simple idea, and I wrote it up in a memo. I wrote it in a memo because CERN is a physics lab. It's not really set up to do software, so there wasn't anywhere you could apply to do some software. And in fact, it has to stop people writing software, because all these creative people, if you let them write all the software they wanted, they'd be spending no time doing anything else, because it's so much fun solving these problems by writing new software, making up programs. So I passed around the memo, and a year later, nothing really had happened. Somebody asked me, oh, what about that idea, that hypertext, that information system? I said, well, I sent you a memo. And they said, oh, did you? Oh, could you send it again? So I sent it around, and I put the date, March 1989, which was the first time, comma, May 1990, which was the second time, just to rub it in, make it obvious. Sent it around, and again, nothing happened. But then one of these special things happened. My boss, Mike Sendall, allowed me to buy a fancy new computer system. Those black boxes called Next, which Steve Jobs was producing at that time, were the latest thing in computing. And the latest thing, particularly in systems which you could write new programs, which were good for writing new programs. They had a great development environment. So the plan was to buy one of these Nexts and see how good it was. And so by doing that, and in order to see how good it was, I should design some program on it. Some random program. How about that hypertext thing you were talking about? So he didn't really give me the nod, but he gave me the wink. He said, go ahead. And that that was what allowed me to actually write the software, make a web browser, make a web editor. So, at the time, I had to sacrifice a few things. Most systems people expected to be completely consistent, but I realized that in order to have a system which would grow, we'd occasionally have to have links which didn't go anywhere. And you'll find that when you use the web now, sometimes there'll be a link, goes somewhere, that's gone away. But that was in fact a really important engineering decision, because to make the whole web consistent would have been unscalable. It wouldn't have worked. It would have stopped the web growing. So that was the technology. That was, if you like, the invention. But what was more exciting for me than the technology itself was the way that took off as a community. It was a community of people, random people, in different fields, different countries. Somebody would hear about it. I'd give a talk, not to an audience of this size, much smaller one, but maybe 3 people at the back might be sufficiently excited to go away and do something. And they would send me an email. I'd get an email from one of them saying, oh, I'm running a web server now. I've put some photos on it. It's an exhibition of Vatican Renaissance art. It's a dinosaur exhibit. It's all kinds of things. And they sent me a list. They sent me the URL, the thing with HTTP, which tells you the name of a web server. And I kept a list of all the web servers, and I have a copy of that list from November 1991, when it had 26 web servers on it. At that time, I had a copy of my whole website on a floppy disk, which I could take to conferences. So that community of people growing faster and faster was what made it take off. And it's the creativity and also the public spiritedness of people out there just thinking, well, I know the web hasn't taken off yet, but if everybody started a web server, it would be great. So I will do it. There are some people who, when it would be great if everybody did X, they will do X, just for the sake of it. Those people did it, and it took off. And that first web server, which was still that black box on my desk for a long time, when we looked at the number of people who viewed it, each month, the number of people who looked at that web server was 10 times the number of people for the same month a year before. So the interest in the web server, that one web server, was going up by a factor of 10 every year. An exponential growth, very steady exponential growth. So at first it was geeks who were excited, and then it was the Economist, I think, was the first newspaper, then other newspaper, then the tabloid press, and then even ministers and heads of state started to become aware of this as the news spread, and we realized that we needed to coordinate this growth. So that was the point when I went around the world looking for places to start some World Wide Web consortium. Companies wanted to make a consortium, and so they needed somewhere that they could trust to join together and build a consensus. Because the important thing about the web is that it's only one web. When you follow a link from a web page, it can go to any place. You don't have an academic web and a commercial web. You don't have a web of high-quality documents and a separate web of low-quality documents, and then a system for promoting them from one to the other. Whenever you draw a line, if you ever draw a line through the web into two halves, so that links can't cross from one to the other, then you destroy the web. Because suddenly the value of each half is terribly badly damaged. And each half will then disintegrate. If a company got to control half the web, and another company got to control half the web, it wouldn't work. So the very important thing about the web was its universality. The same web must work for all types of information, for all languages, for people in all cultures. It should work no matter what type of computer you used, or what type of operating system you used, or which browser software you decided to use. It must work particularly whether or not you had disability. If your eyesight wasn't very good, the web should be able to work for you too. So the universality was its primary goal and has always been a key thing behind its engineering. So there I was, 1992, 93 came around, and during 1993 it was clear that we had to start something. The internet, which is the underlying network, which was invented 20 years before the web, okay? The internet and the web are very different things. The internet is this connectivity between the computers which I'd used to build the web on top of it. The internet was started in the United States. It had even been resisted a bit in Europe. I was very lucky to come at a time when it was just breaking into Europe. So CERN was one of the first places to get the internet. But when the web took off, because the internet was so well established in America, the web took off very, very quickly across the internet in America. The web was at all the American universities. So I really had to have a base in America to start this consortium. So somebody suggested that I should talk to Michael de Touzas, who wrote the preface to the book. And he, as you can tell from the preface to the book, was very supportive. He took me under his wing. He organized for me to go to MIT. He organized for the people he knew in the industry to support the consortium. And when I explained to him that actually I didn't want to really leave Europe completely, I really wanted the consortium to be international. Because I was very worried that when I went to MIT, I had this vision that the people at MIT would only see MIT or only see America. And they would start something which would be very American. But I found out that he was extremely pleased to make something, because of course he was a Greek. And so he was passionate about getting things happening in Greece, he was in Europe, and particularly had to have collaborations internationally so that this World Wide Web, as I called it, could actually really be worldwide. So, in fact, George Matkidis, a good friend of Michael de Touzas, and Michael together, got together, and the Greeks at that point were very much dominant when it came to the forces, often behind the surface, but the strongest forces getting things to happen, arranging a high-level diplomatic dinner at which people from both sides of the Atlantic, first we involved Japan later, agreed that the World Wide Web Consortium should be formed and that it should be an international thing. So it's nice to come back here and celebrate that Greek connection across the Atlantic, even though unfortunately Michael de Touzas is no longer with us. So that was the consortium, and the consortium really deploys standards. When we know how to do something, it makes sure that everybody, all the computers do it in the same way, speak the same language. And deploying standards, it makes new markets, and it's been quite successful. It has a good reputation as being a fair and open place. It also has established that when you do work with the World Wide Web Consortium, that work will be available to everybody in the world without them having to pay any royalties. So that's a very important thing, which it took us a long time for Danny Weitzer and others to lead the industry to a point where they could make that as much as they could of a guarantee. In fact, the stage was set back in 1993 by CERN when CERN said that CERN would not be charging any royalties, and that was a great start on the road to being a royalty-free space, and that has been an essential part of the growth of the web. So now here we are, and the web has grown, and the web, yes, as George said, it has about 10 to the 11 web pages. It has as many web pages as there are neurons in your brain. But of course, the neurons in your brain, they go down every time you have some wine, and the neurons and the web pages on the web, they go up every moment. There is new web pages being produced. But if you can imagine taking the web and making a model of the web and making it the size of the brain, and if I could put it in front of you, you wouldn't recognize it. It'd be a very strange shape. It'd be very tangled, because any part of the web can connect to any other part. The brain has some large-scale structure. It has the visual nerves which go from the front to the back, and so on. But the web has a structure which we didn't plan. That we designed how two people connect, how a person connects to a web server. The HTTP protocol defines how one web browser talks to one web server. But what happens with the web, the actual connections which are made by people, those have emerged. So the web is a very complex thing. And we all realized that there was nobody really doing a science of it. There is a science of the brain. There's cognitive science. It's made for people from different disciplines like psychology and biochemistry and genetics and all various science which connect to how a brain is produced and how a brain functions. And they come together, they've made cognitive science, and they're making quite a lot of progress in understanding the brain. We need the same thing for this huge thing, very different in some ways, different two fundamental ways. One is, for the web, if you like, we are the little atomic things. That when a link is made, a person makes a link. They make a blog, and they refer to another blog, they're making a link. When somebody follows a link, it's a human being follow a link. So the nodes, if you like, are people. The web is humanity connected. It's very big. The other different thing about the web is that we didn't design the brain. We observed the brain. But the web was something we designed. And so we could redesign it. We could change it. If we discover that it should be different, we have a duty to make sure that it is the optimal. So web science is a fascinating thing, but also it's very important for us to make sure that it is stable. Well, for me, one of the most interesting things about web science that makes it different from the science, for example, of designing glasses of water, and is that if you design a glass of water, you can design it, and you can test it, and if it works, then you can go and sell more, and if people might give you feedback and say that how it could be improved, but you can then immediately make a new better glass of water. But with the web, you design how two people connect, maybe. They log on to a social networking site, one person offers to make a photograph available to another, or one person says another person is their colleague. And then what happens on a large scale, the macro scale, is very difficult to work out from the micro scale. It's not at all obvious, and we don't really know. Like physics, for example, will tell you how microscopically atoms interact. And then you do some mathematics. In physics, you use the gas laws, and you calculate that if the gas was really made up of lots of little balls bouncing around, and the balls were small enough, it would feel like this. They were squishy. And so physicists can do that leap from the microscopic to the macroscopic in some cases, in a very small number of cases in practice. And economists try to figure out, okay, if everybody works as a selfish individual and we have money, then how will the world work large? And I must say I'm a bit worried about economics, because recently the world has been unstable. And in fact, if you think about the economic system, and you think about the web of humanity, they're very, very closely connected. Those people communicate using the web. The people who use the web are motivated by economy. So the web in a way is an economic system. So yes, so as George Miskita said, that there's all kinds of different disciplines: psychology, maths, sociology, physics, anthropology, computer science, philosophy, and economics. There's a whole list of disciplines which we need to get together, and hopefully we have got together for this conference, but to find web science. So here we are then at the first web science conference, and that is web science, and that is looking back. So what can we say looking forward? Well, clearly, what's first really important is that we realize that the future is bigger than the past. You can obviously, extrapolating from what's happened, it's clear that changes are coming faster and faster and faster. And so it would be stupid to imagine that the change will now slow down. So we can imagine that not only is there a lot of future, but that during the future, change will happen faster and faster. Partly the reason for that, things accelerating, is in technology, each layer is a foundation for the next one. When the telephone wires were put in so that people could talk using conventional telephones, then these copper wires were connected all over the place. Then, when people wanted to connect computers, they used the existing copper wires to start with, and they made modems which allowed two computers to connect over the existing telephone network. Then, when they got computers connecting to each other, and the internet was invented as a system for sending little packets around, then it used the existing methods of connecting computers together to send packets from one place to another, but this time with a special address like a postcard, so that when it goes from computer to computer and eventually end up at the right computer where you wanted it to get to, so that two computers could communicate with each other without worrying about all the connections in between. So the internet was built on top of that. Now when the people designed the internet, Vince Cerf and company, they designed the internet also as a foundation. They didn't make any assumptions about what it would be used for. That was very important. They didn't imagine the web, but it didn't matter. They built it so that I could invent the web, other people could invent all kinds of other things, like internet telephony and shipping video and things like that. So the internet is just a medium which allows communication between two computers. The web is a space in which we have information and in which we have web applications. So each time, because the internet was deployed, as I said, where the internet was already deployed, the web spread very much more quickly than the internet had already spread. And the internet spread very much more quickly than the telephone system had spread. So things are going faster and faster and faster. As we look forward, we have, as I say, a duty to make sure that the web we design serves humanity and optimally. People look on the web and they see good things and they see bad things. Sometimes they look on the web and they see new systems starting and they're not sure whether at the end they're going to serve well or ill. People have a lot of questions. Where should we draw the line with privacy? What should we do now about managing how we use different pieces of information we've got from different people, and how we respect people's wishes for information to be used in particular ways. There are lots of concerns about it. So, as we look forward, obviously there are some things which we know are going to happen, some things which are going to be invented by our students, by people, maybe by people at this conference, which I can't imagine. But some of the things we can look forward to. For example, we know that one important change which is happening is that the web is getting onto these mobile devices. And importantly, it's not just people in this room who carry fancy portable digital assistants in their pockets, but the nice thing is when the web works on this, it will also work on cell phones that people have in developing countries where those cell phones may be the only access they have to the internet. So there is a really important move to make sure that, well, you should make sure that your website, try it on your phone. You should try it on your phone, not just because you want the executives around you to be able to access it when they're in their executive planes, but because when they can access it on their phone, then maybe it'll be useful by people in developing countries who otherwise would not be able to get it at all. So the mobile web is one area in which we're moving. Another area which I'm really emphasizing this year, and I'd like everybody to go and take away and emphasize this year as well, is that as well as having documents on the web, also we should have data on the web. A lot of life, a lot of running a government, a lot of running a company, a lot of doing scientific research, you have data. You have databases, you have spreadsheets, you have data which may not be very interesting to look at immediately, but if somebody takes it and combines it with other data and displays it, you can discover all kinds of new things, new science. You can perhaps help a company avoid an awkward financial situation. You can help a government use its resources more effectively. You can draw conclusions about what one government has done and what another government has done. Maybe you can look at healthcare information and old clinical trials and a chemical information, and you can discover a new drug to cure AIDS or to cure cancer. These really important things that we need to do, we can do if we have access to the data. At the moment, some of the ideas which will be parts of the solutions to these problems are in people's heads, people's brains of scientists across the world. But very often, a lot of the knowledge which we need is sitting in the computer next to them in a disk. And even if we can get to it through a web page, really, we don't want that. A scientist doesn't want to see a web page, they want the data. So we've got this movement called linked open data. It's a movement for open linked data. Linked data is like linked documents, but it's data. It's very simple, and it's now growing. I'm very excited the way that it's taking off, and I hope that by the end of this year we'll see a significant amount of government data being put on the web. Already is starting. There's, in various countries. There's some US data, government data, which is out there on the web, some UK government data on the web. There's some very interesting projects based in Berlin at the Freie Universität. So this linked open data movement is something which is very topical at the moment, and I urge you to remember it if you have to remember one thing from this. But anyway, so these are some of the things which hopefully will make the web more powerful and make the web more exciting. But if you stand back, and as we did for a group of us with Wendy, at one point we were sitting back and thinking, okay, so the goal of web science then should be that the web should serve humanity, right? And when we looked at that, we thought, well, you know what? WSRI, the Web Science Research Initiative, web science isn't actually going to be enough, because it's not just science you need. Yes, science tends to investigate exciting new things for the early adopters, for people in developed countries. The only moment you talk about serving humanity, immediately you realize that 80% of the world doesn't use the web. For 80% of the world, maybe they're in a place that has no phone signal. Well, actually, an awful lot of them do have signal. But some of them, they have signal but no phone. They can't afford a phone yet. Some of them have a phone, but it doesn't have a web browser on it. But a lot of phones, most of the phones being made now have web browsers on them. So maybe they have a phone, they have a web browser on it, but they live in a country which uses a character set which wasn't really available and isn't available on the phone. Maybe Ethiopian characters that, for example, may not be available on every phone. So, well, maybe they have a phone, they have a web browser, they have the right characters, they can go to a website, but when they go to a website, it's a social networking website, and they can see what it says, but really, the way that social networking site works was designed for an American teenager, female American teenager, and in their village, the society works differently, so that there's a cultural difference. So that really, they need to be able to make their own social networking site, which they would need to be able to run from a little server in their own village. Maybe if they have a central water-powered recharging point for their cell phones, maybe at the point they could put a little wireless base station and a web server where they could do their own social networking system, which would connect to the other villages and so on, in their own way. One of the things which has been very nice to see has been that when people are in really difficult situations, they use whatever technology they get in very creative ways. So when you look at all that, that is a really important part, and it wasn't really covered by web science. So various people who had been involved in the web from different angles decided that it was time that we should form a World Wide Web Foundation. And as we stand here in this foundation for the Hellenic world, I can tell you that we're planning a foundation, if you like, for the virtual world. And there may be a large overlap if you go next door between the virtual world and the Hellenic world. But the foundation for the virtual world, the World Wide Web Foundation, should coordinate across the board. It should get where people are on the ground in developing countries with understanding of what is needed there. And there are another place, there are researchers, maybe here, who have an imagination where they can see what would be possible if it was needed. Then they need to be coordinated. We need to get them connected. We need to make sure that we promote the development of the web as part of the development, connected to the healthcare development, the economic development in developing countries. But also we need to connect it to the researchers, so the research is done with an awareness of what the needs are for the whole 100% of the world, not just for the 20%. And then when industry meets together and they decide on new standards that they're going to put into the cell phones, they need to be informed by both of these things, by the needs that people have all over the world, and also they need to be informed by the brightest ideas come from the craziest of scientists, wherever they've come from, whichever discipline they're in, who've met at a web science conference and discussed what could be possible. So that is something that we're doing now. We are starting a World Wide Web Foundation. That is something for the next phase. If you're interested in it, do go to webfoundation.org or talk to me afterwards. And that will, I hope, tie together a huge number of hopes and dreams and take us on into a very exciting future, most of which will be things which none of us here can possibly imagine now. Thank you very much.